So we look at the Global Plastics Treaty, which is currently being negotiated. So we have UNFCCC, which is negotiated several years ago, and now we have a conference of parties. But the Global Plastics Treaty is still under negotiation. So this is this is ongoing work, and we don't know how it will pan out, in the coming months. So in March 2022, last year, the year before last now, the United Nations Environment Assembly met, and the 175 member countries passed a resolution popularly called 514, which was to end plastic pollution, including in the marine environment. So it started as a marine environment treaty, but then moved on to plastic pollution across all the entire lifespan. It's also meant to be an internationally binding instrument, which is different from the other instruments that we have, whether it's Minamata or UNFCCC or even Stockholm and BRS and all of them. The reason why they wanted it to be internationally binding was because of also what some of the speakers earlier said, that if there is no legal binding, then what happens is really up to what the parties want to do or not. The other important element of this treaty was that it would be across the plastic lifespan, which meant this is a UNEP diagram, which is the official diagram that's used, even in the official texts, where it starts from extraction, in the orange part on the left, and goes on to extraction. This is the feedstocks, which is naphtha and other things, the polymerization. Then, of course, the design, production, distribution, consumption of plastics, which all of us do. And then, of course, when it's out of the system into waste, right up till disposal. And the purview of this treaty is meant to be this entire lifespan. But why am I speaking of plastics in a decarbonizing energy conference? And this is the connect. In IEA's 2018 report called Future of Petrochemicals, what it said is that CO2 emissions from the chemical sector was about 18% of total industrial CO2 emissions. Another report by Beyond Plastics says that if the plastics lifespan was supposed to be a country, it would be the 5th largest GHG emitter after China, US, India, and Russia. In 2019 alone, emissions from plastics accounted for 3.4% of total global GHG emissions. The third statistic is actually only the end plastic, but then plastic is oil, plastic is fossil fuel, and one can't, forget that. Another statistic, why is it important for us? Why is it important for India? And coming to that, if you look at this is again the Future of Petrochemical report, and what we can't see too clearly possibly is that the axis there, which says 200, 150, 150, 150 for all the other countries. In the Asia Pacific region, it's 600, 450, 300. So what basically we are saying is that in the coming years, the projection of oil refining or rather fossil fuel chemical production will happen mostly in the Asia Pacific region, while the rest of the world is becoming stringent about their environmental laws, especially EU, even the US. To whatever extent, all those fossil fuels are going to come to us, and we are going to be, refining this on behalf of the rest of the world. Again, some data is that the APC region will see the largest increase in the production of petrochemicals by 2050. That's the IEA report. Asia would lead expansion mostly through their existing refineries. So there might be few greenfield refineries, but expansion, we're seeing that already in India. China, of course, would lead West Asia, and India would follow. Saudi Arabia is expanding its own downstream by investing in overseas refineries. So there's also a push from oil producing companies for refineries to thrive in our parts of the world. For example, if you look at the Ratnagiri project, that's not yet come up, but it's planned. We have Saudi Aramco, which intends to invest here, or even in other parts of the world. So they need to keep their businesses going, so they're investing in our countries. The interest of not just West Asia, but also you find your USA and Europe investing in the AP region and in India. Some more data, global data on Oil and Gas Intelligence Center says that there would be a total growth of 35.2%, globally on petrochemicals. So this whole thing of countries moving away from oil and gas, or banks not investing in oil and gas, is also not true, because oil companies are trying to pivot into plastic so that they don't get into losses. Big oil companies are not going to shut shop just because there's either a UNFCCC or if there is decarbonizing, which is a current heartache for everyone. China will account for highest capacity additions. India and Iran would be second. There's also an oil report that came out by IEA, which says the same thing, the International Energy Agency. Industry consultants also believe that Asia is where all these capacities will be going ahead. So this is an area that all of us need to be worried about. Skipping some of this. Now coming to, so this is the context in which we are here today. Oil and gas projects in the Asia Pacific, this is where they are. There's 39% are already in construction, 31% have already received approval. So there's a massive build out of oil gas refineries, crackers that are happening in the Asia Pacific region, and within this region, India is a very, very big player. So coming back to the UNEA and the INC, just to say, the UNEA 5.2 instituted the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, which is again comprised of 175 countries. They're supposed to meet 5 times. The first one happened last year in November, December, at Uruguay. The next one, happened in May in Paris last year. Then we had it in November, this again, last year in Kenya. And you have the next happening in April in Canada. The final one will happen in Seoul or Busan in later this year. And the 5th one would be the political meeting where the world leaders would come and actually sign the treaty. So that's the plan. There are intersessionals, like Shoumira mentioned. These are very valuable because that's when you deep dive into issues and you actually come to clarity of understanding each other. What has happened with this is that at the end of INC2, the chair of the secretariat was given the mandate to write a zero draft, which was discussed in INC3. And in INC3, a lot of drama happened, which is what the rest of this will be about. But the outcome of INC3 is that we went in with a 36-page zero draft. We've come out with a 79-page zero draft. So it's bloated. Instead of actually focusing and zeroing on the options that you want, countries actually said, we don't want any of this and we want ABC, and actually expanded it. They also came up with no mandate for intersessionals, and that there were 2 sticky points. And one very big sticky point was that the developed countries, one of the intersessionals topic was about financing and of the polluter countries really financing the developing countries, which are not the polluting countries, which is something again that is a demand in UNFCCC. And the developed countries absolutely said, no, we will not do that. We will not talk about that. And so that was a sticky point, and it ended up in a stalemate. There was no intersessional. The second intersessional was on primary plastic polymers. The oil and petrochemical producing countries said, we don't want that on the table, and that was a stalemate, and that is a sticky point. So we do not have even a mandate for intersessionals. We all just came back home and went back to sleep, basically. So these are the 13 aspects that were, these are the elements in the zero draft. Like we said, it starts with primary plastic polymers, which is the feedstock for plastics and the absolute upstream, and it goes right down, to waste management and things like that. So it really encompasses the entire lifespan as it is. The part 3 of zero draft was on financing and capacity building. And the part 4 was on the implementation mechanisms. There was some parts which had placeholders, which was basically that in INC2, these things were not discussed. So what the Secretariat did is that they proposed it, and then it would get discussed in INC3, which was the preamble, objectives, definitions, principles, scope. So there was a whole bunch of things that were not discussed in INC2, which got discussed in INC3. But like I said, that's all contributed to that 79-page document that we're all looking at today. Just to talk a little bit about what are the political groupings, because we try not to use the word politics, but at the end of the day, these negotiations are political negotiations. These are not, unfortunately, scientific negotiations, which they technically absolutely should be. There is the High Ambition Coalition to End Plastic Pollution, which has 63 countries, is chaired by Norway and Rwanda. You have PCIDS, which is the Pacific and Small Island Developing Countries. On the one hand, they want a high ambition. The PCIDS are the ones who are going to all sink in with increasing water levels and have the worst to lose. Them, and of course the Africa group and the Latin America group also are very progressive. However, they have regional dynamics and are not able to come across so strongly as a group. In terms of low ambition, you have the Gulf Cooperation Council, the 9 countries who are part of that, but also the BRICS Plus, excluding South Africa, who do not align with the BRICS in this space, but unfortunately and very, very, very sadly, including India, which is a very, very low ambition country within the Plastics Treaty, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a bit. There's massive conflict of interest. American Chemistry Council, which is the most notorious body in terms of petrochemicals and plastics, right from its inception in the, in the early 50s, is there in large numbers at every INC, but INC3 saw a 36% increase in the presence of the polluters in the room. Sometimes these also outnumbered the 70 smallest member states. Even Bangladesh has only 1 person who comes. It costs a lot to go to these kind of meetings. And so countries can't afford delegations, but these companies can. And 6 member states had fossil fuel company representatives in their delegation, which means anyone who's, earlier Shamida said observers, and we are observers. We don't have a right to be there. It's the benevolence of the member states that allows us to be there, and we've got to really behave ourselves. If we don't, we'll get thrown out. But these don't have to do that. They are sitting inside closed-door meetings which are not open to observers and are also influencing the negotiations like, civil society for sure cannot at all. Chemical and fossil fuel lobbyists outnumber the 64 representatives from the PSEDs. And also there is a scientist coalition there, which is doing brilliant work in bringing the science of polymers and petrochemicals, and they're there. I'm actually now going to just very quickly share some analyzed data just to share with you where we are headed in this story of decarbonizing by only looking at primary plastic polymers and then the financing. But so the zero draft had 3 options. The first option was the most ambitious, something that even we would want and even we would happily support. So option 2 watered down, and option 3 was the worst. And some of us have analyzed, people, the different countries and the positions they've taken. And so we've categorized it as countries suggesting an even more ambitious clause than what is in the treaty. Row D is agreeing with what there is. Row C, E basically disagreeing with it. And row F is, we looked at all the oil producing and petrochemical and plastic producing countries, bunched them together and tried to see what they have to say about it. In primary plastic polymers, the first option, 62% of the oil, petrochemical and plastic producing countries, which is basically GCC, BRICS, and a few more, perhaps Vietnam, Indonesia, and others. 62% said that primary plastic polymers, this part should be off the table. This is not part of the plastic lifespan. Plastic is born when it's born in a factory. So there's an absolute unwillingness to admit that plastics are oil, plastics are fossil fuel, and do not want it on the table, do not want any negotiation at all on it. So that's 62%. The first option, which is the most stringent, that there will be a cap and then a slow phase out. 86% of the oil petchem producing companies said they do not want that. However, only 58% of the total countries, if you look at the 175 countries, 58% said no. But 86% of the oil plastic producing countries said they absolutely do not want to talk about it. When they say that, this point about managing and reducing the global production and supply of primary plastics to achieve the global targets, 50% of the countries, if you look at the 175, they actually agreed to it. They said, okay, we'll go that walk, we'll walk that much. We will manage and we will reduce our production to match global targets. But again, the petchem and oil producing countries said, no, nothing doing. 67% said, we do not want this at all on the table. Parties, in order to achieve the target, would develop nationally determined targets. We still had 71% of the, the oil and petchem producing countries saying no to this, lower than the 80 to 86%, because this is seen, for example, even India sees nationally determined targets as still something that they're willing to live with, but not globally determined targets. They're also willing to, they're unwilling to have this as a legally binding treaty. So then you go to the next version, which is a watered down version, which says that they will take measures to implement provisions. This is the same roundabout thing that Shomyuda was talking of, not talking phase out, but talking of transition, for example. Even there, the petchem and oil producing countries are saying no, 71% are saying no. And as you go along, I'm rushing now, but as you go along, you'll see all that is in red is your petchem and oil producing countries, and they do not want anything to do with primary plastic polymers to be controlled. Now, our very simplistic, perhaps, argument is that if you're really planning your single-use plastic ban, for example, which we have in India, or you have extended producer responsibility where fast-moving consumer goods companies have to take back the plastics that they put in the market and manage that plastics, if all of this was actually going to reduce in plastic consumption, then why would you want to produce more LDPE? Why would you want to produce more HDPE if there is no use for it? Once the LDPE is out into those pellets, you have nothing to make it into because you're actually cutting down on your plastic production. And then there comes, absolute silence or whataboutery saying, you have, your computer is made of plastic and your phone is, of course it is made of plastic. This is not an anti-plastic treaty. It is a plastic treaty to reduce it to only use of essential use of plastics and to, phase out of non-essential use of plastics. So that is one. Chemicals of concern was another where you found, these countries again putting up a resistance, and you'll see all those numbers. No time to get into the details, but just to say,
you have a minute.
Yeah, that's not much. but to just say that even chemicals of concern, because these chemicals of concern, and their argument is that it's there in the BRS, in the Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm Conventions. Basel Convention looks at waste trade. Stockholm Convention looks at chemicals. And so, therefore, we do not need to look at it. But then you can't govern a treaty with bits and pieces lying, elsewhere. One treaty has to have its own governance ingrained, in the treaty itself. We can't keep borrowing because those have different members. Those are not legally binding. Some people are members of the Stockholm Convention. Some people have not ratified the Stockholm Convention. So it's not the same group of people who are there, everywhere. So that is a problem. I'll only finally go to the finance part of it. I'm skipping a couple. You'll see it's zero. But because nobody wants to talk. The developed countries don't want to give money to the developing countries. And there is this very, very amazing option which all of us really liked a lot, which is about a polluter fee. And 19% of the oil producing countries said no, but actually all of them say they don't want it at all. It's not like, as in they didn't want any penalizing, they didn't want any polluter fee, they didn't want any of that on the table. There was absolute protection of the industry over here where no polluter will have to pay a price. And I will go back to something that, and I'll also then end with this, but I'll go to something that has come repeatedly. I don't remember who said what, but this thing of, at the end of the day, it's the consumer. At the end of the day, these residences are using all this electricity. But who brought us here is really a question, right? With your technological innovation, if there's more and more consumption, we can keep on trying to, run and catch up. We'll never catch up because our consumption is always far, ahead of what we can do to manage it. And therefore, especially in the question of polymers and plastics, which is not essential. These are not, of course, you need your plastics for your CT scan machine and your MRI machine. No one denies that. But can we use the principle of essentiality, which, for example, the Minamata Convention does have, and apply it over here and see what's non-essential plastic and actually move towards a phase out of that. And that and only that would be putting our money where our mouth is and not managing it and not doing a net zero of it, or not saying, okay, we'll use it like this and then we will, manage the waste like that, because waste management is really a postponement. Right now, we're either landfilling it, dumping it in the sea, or burning. Burning is furans and dioxins, which actually are the most carcinogenic, pollutants that exist, on this planet. And we have evidence of that, in Okhla and other places, even in India. So the only way we can do, a country including India wants this treaty to be a waste management treaty. They do not want it to be. When I said yesterday that the industry does not want anything to change, they do not want anything to change. Plast India Foundation, it's a Reliance-backed plastic, industry association. Reliance India Limited, CPMAI, which is the Chemical Petrochemical Manufacturers Association of India, they were all in the treaty this time. And in fact, the Plus India Foundation person was actually part of the Malaysian government delegation, right? So even, I mean, I think we need to be pragmatic. It's not only India, but it's actually the entire world right today, apart from countries who are vulnerable or who have developed enough to now say, okay, you know, we've grown, the EU countries, we've grown, we've had our money, we have the money for our future, so let us, you know, phase out. Or the countries who are going to like basically not exist anymore because, you know, sea levels are rising. But anyone else, and especially the developing countries, and I'll end with this point of CBDR, which was definitely a hallowed and a very, it was a very well-intentioned, you know, principle that was brought in Rio, but has actually been completely corrupted today. It is almost like getting a license to continue polluting, rather than a responsibility of saying, we have not polluted, so let us not pollute. Instead, it says, we have not polluted, so let us now pollute how much those have polluted. We are on a race to pollute and actually not on a race to decarbonize. At least when we go to these spaces, this is what you know, people like us take away, that what we're saying, it's a bit of look London, talk Tokyo. We're talking decarbonizing policy in the country, but in international spaces, we are actually making a race to pollute more. Thanks.